The first project that you will be assigned for this class this summer is the CBA, and that's a curriculum-based assessment. So this first project, what you'll be doing is you'll be creating assessments. The second project is just the opposite, where you'll be analyzing the data from an assessment. So this is where you're going to be creating an assessment for your context. So if you go first to our project resources, CBA, you'll see these are some examples for you to look at if you have questions. The directions, the rubric as seen on TK20, and then a template for you to follow. So really the first thing you want to do is sort of open the directions. And let's take a look at what this assignment is going to be like. So it's going to help you to create a standards-based assessment. That means one of the very first things you're going to do, and you can see here from number 1, you're going to go to the North Carolina Standard Course of Study, that's the Common Core or the Essential Standards at this time, and you're going to pull an appropriate standard from your context. Now this might be kind of big, and that's good. You want it to be able to span the different kinds of knowledge, and you'll read about that in your chapter 3. They'll talk about knowledge, reasoning, skill, and product. And so you're going to be creating a couple of assessments that span that range of knowledge and skill. So you'll pick one out and you'll just cut and paste it. Make sure that you have the numbers, the title, everything that you need. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to analyze the essential content. So what are students going to need to know and be able to do? And here I give you some hints. It's vocabulary, facts, relationships, principles, generalizations, all that stuff. You want to think about Bloom's taxonomy as you complete the table. And I have some links for that for you. Part 3 is deconstructing the standards into clear learning targets. And then 4 is actually creating the assessment. You'll create 2 kinds of assessment. This first one is focused on those lower level thinking skills, knowledge, and reasoning. It's only what students know. It's not what they're able to do. It's not if they can apply it or synthesize it or create something new. This is just the selected response. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. So that's parts 1 through 4 that will be due first. So let's go back and look at the template. So the first thing you do is put your name here, and if you're working in a group, add everybody's name. And then this first part is pretty easy. You're just going to cut and paste your standard here. And then just tell me what subject and grade you are doing. Here on page 44 in your text, chapter 3, it talks about the kind of learning targets, the type of learning targets. And remember, this project is sort of a wide spanning project. So you want to cast a big net. That means that if you pick too limited of a learning target, you won't have enough information to do this whole project. So make sure that the standard that you identify can span all 4 of these types of learning targets. Okay? So for this, everyone should have them all marked. And then I want you to give a rationale for why you think it's knowledge, reasoning, skill, or product target. And again, all of that is on page 44 in your text. Okay? So now you have sort of what you're going to assess. And now you have to sort of break that down, because that standard that you identified up here is huge and it has a lot of content, a lot of information. So now you're going to take that and sort of unpack it. It talks about unpacking standards in our text and also in the Gutsky reading. The Gutsky reading has a chart similar to this one, but this chart is one that is aligned better with our project. So it's similar but a little different. You can see here that we have knowledge, reasoning, skill, and product. So that's how you're going to unpack your larger standard. And what you'll say is, okay, so what are the facts? I always ask myself questions. So what are the facts about this standard? Let's say you're going to do the characteristics of an insect. What are the facts that they're going to need to know? Well, they're going to need to know certain vocabulary words. They're going to need to know what characteristics mean. They're going to need to know what an antenna is. So the facts go right here. That's your basic content knowledge. Then the procedures. Do they need to know some sort of procedure? A lot of times if you're doing science or math, you'll have procedural knowledge. You won't have it in the other subjects as much. But the procedural knowledge is, okay, so what do they need to know first? What do they need to know next? And what do they need to know after that? How to solve a math problem, how to proceed through an inquiry-based science experiment. What's the conceptual understanding that they'll need? They need to understand that an insect, all insects are not bugs. All insects have these specific characteristics. What's the inference? What do they need to infer? What do they need to analyze? Well, in this case, they would need to analyze insects and animals. They need to analyze insects and arachnids. They would analyze insects and other species. And they might compare those two species as well. They would have to compare the characteristics of a bug and an insect. Do they need to classify it? Evaluation. Now remember, evaluation here does not mean assessment. Evaluation here means, do they place a judgment on it? Is this a good example of an insect, or is this not a good example of an insect? Why? And then the flip side of that evaluation would be synthesis. So they would say these three examples are insects because they all have antennae, they all have 3 body parts, they all have 6 legs. And so that would be sort of an example of a synthesis. So that's the knowledge and reasoning. That's the content, or the lower level, the facts, I always like to call them. The skill is getting a little bit higher. So now they need to do something with that. So let's keep with my insect theory here. And what would they need to do to demonstrate they understand the characteristics of an insect? Well, I might have my second graders use clay and create an insect of their own. And from that skill, they would demonstrate that they understand insects have 3 body parts, they have antennae, they have wings, they have 6 legs. And then here, you could see that they would create that product. They would create the product that's a model of an insect, okay? So mine are linked together. If you're doing phys ed, it might be a little different. You might have them demonstrate that they can use their fine motor skills. You might have them demonstrate the appropriate way to serve a volleyball. And then the product they create might be a video. Okay? So that's how you're going to unpack this chart. You may not have something for everything. However, you do want to have a robust essential content chart here. It will help you in the long run. So you may not have procedural knowledge, you may not have inference, you may not have a couple of things, but it should be mostly filled out. So that's part 2. Part 3 is where chapter 3 really helps you out here. You're going to write learning targets in student-friendly language, and that's the key here. So you're going to now take this information and you're going to turn it into a learning target and a student-friendly statement. So you may say here, students will be able to compare insects and bugs. The next one might be, students will be able to analyze several insects. Make sure that it's in student-friendly language. If you're in elementary ed, you may choose I can statements, but you don't have to. It just has to be in student-friendly language so that your first grader, second grader, 10th grader, 11th grader can understand what they should be able to do, what they need to know and what they need to be able to do. And then you'll come back over here and you'll check how are you going to measure it and what kind of target type is it. Remember in Chapter 3, they have on page 44 the types of learning targets, and that will help you here. And then a chart that you will want to bookmark later on. It comes from Chapter 4 here is the assessment method, and it's on page 94. And it's just a great chart, and it tells you what the best method is to meet these kinds of learning targets. Okay, so that's what you'll do here. And then part 4 here, and I'm going to say this a million times because every semester students get confused. Part 4 is going to be just testing, see right here, knowledge and reasoning. Okay? Now part 5 is where they're going to be doing that higher level skill or product. Will they be doing it? But they're not doing it in part 4. Part 4 is just testing the knowledge and the reasoning. Just this information. So if you look at that chart in Chapter 4, it tells you that really the best kind of assessment for knowledge and reasoning is either a personal communication or written response, and then selected response is okay. Personal communication I use a lot with the young children because they can't really read yet or write. So in order to really find out what they know, speaking with them is really the best bet. So you're going to create an assessment here and make sure that you include these points. What are the learning targets you're assessing? And you can just take those right from here. Just copy and paste them. The point value for each item, don't forget this. How will you assign point value? Remember, not everything is equal. And then make sure that you give me all the answers as well. And they can be in red or you can highlight them, whatever you want. But make sure you have these 3 elements in your assessment. And remember, I have all of those examples for you, so you can go and see what several examples from your context might look like. Okay, so that's parts 1 through 4 of the CBA that are due in this module. Please give me a call or an email if you have any questions, and I look forward to reading your projects.